Wow, middle of autumn. I know what you're thinking about. Christmas! This weekend, the new comedy, The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, releases in theaters from director Dallas Jenkins. And 5 Thanksgiving seasons ago, in November 2019, new fans began watching the second half of a new little crowd-funded biblical fiction drama called The Chosen. This week, we are thankful to host one of the 3 chosen screenwriters who also co-wrote The Best Christmas Pageant Ever, Ryan Swanson.
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
We are thankful that you've joined us for Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven.com, in which we explore fantastical stories for God's glory. I am E. Stephen Burnett, getting a jump on the Thanksgiving season this year because I am feeling thankful. I'm the co-host of this podcast, publisher of Lorehaven, and the author of a new sci-fi adventure novel launching in March called Above the Circle of Earth.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and as we record this, it's early November, so if you have already gotten your Christmas decorations out, I am silently judging you, and this is episode 237. How has The Chosen become the world's top Christian-made fandom?
You know, just as a reason to talk about The Chosen and biblical fiction, I have informally designated biblical fiction as a cousin genre to fantastical fiction. Are there dragons? Not that you can see. Are there spaceships? No. But are there miracles? Yes. Is there the epic plot arc of the gospel, spanning from Genesis to Revelation, with the keystone plotline of Jesus Christ and his life, death, and resurrection in the middle? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a historical fantasy in a sense.
Yes, but it just happens to be true. It is the true myth, obligatory Lewis and Tolkien reference. Although at Fantastical Truth from Lorehaven.com, we're interested in exploring newer stories, not just cycling back to the old ones, great as they are, from Lewis and Tolkien. And part of what we do at Lorehaven.com is reviews of these stories, such as our most recent review of one of our reviewers' books, actually, The Time Door by Shannon McDermott. That just released last week from Enclave Publishing. So we need to give a shout out there. I also put my name to this review just to be completely above board. I enjoyed this story. I think you will too. Everybody's talking about Mars, but Shannon got there first. There's even a little political thriller element in here because it turns out that once you go to Mars, they may not let you come back. But fortunately, there's some secrets to discover beneath the soils of that planet. We're also starting our book quest, an autumnal selection for The Burning Tree by Helen Dent. I mentioned that last week, and we've started this book quest on Monday in the Lorehaven Guild, our Castle in the Cloud at Discord, which you can only enter by subscribing free at Lorehaven.com. Put your email address in there, and we will send you the code to enter the guild. Our top sponsor for this episode is returning champion Sky Turtle Nova. That's an imprint from our friends at Oasis Family Media. They've released a spooky story last week called Rift by Stephen James, part 1 of a new trilogy. Some doors were never meant to be opened. Some tales were never meant to be set free. When 17-year-old Sahara O'Shaughnessy discovers a rift into the realm of lore, the most haunting stories she's been telling her friends come to life, and she must find a way to stop them before they tear her world apart. Rift explores loss, longing, and courage with spine-chilling suspense. Set within the Appalachian Mountains, it walks the boundaries between the known and the unknown. Sky Turtle Nova presents Rift, the haunting first book in the Rift trilogy by award-winning author and previous podcast guest Stephen James. It arrived October 29 wherever fantastic books are sold. It's also available in audio from Oasis Audio. You can see that creepy looking cover in our show notes for this episode 237, or for the full archive, go to lorehaven.com/podcast. Zach, we are celebrating early Thanksgiving. Maybe we get ahead of the inflation by getting our turkeys early and sticking them in the freezer. I just want to say real quick about The Chosen, though. We've done a lot of episodes about this show and quite a few articles. And one of those is episode 148. Why do some Christians revile The Chosen? So we're not getting into all that here. I'm guessing Dallas Jenkins and the crew are a little weary of cycling back to those arguments. Just wanted to acknowledge those people who may have an issue with shows that present a picture of Jesus. It's not automatically for you to worship. That's not the point of the television. It's not the point of the stories. But we go over those objections, and we are of clear conscience about that. And this is a show that we can overall celebrate. Must also credit Jeneth Dick, writer of our most recent article about the Chosen Con that happened this past just a few months ago. She got us this connection. She made the mutual intro to Ryan Swanson, our guest, who's one of the screenwriters of The Chosen from the very beginning. And I will note, however, that we recorded this interview several months ago. In fact, it was before that Chosen Con event, which is where they announced the expansion of the Bible verse. That's what I call it. That's what they should call it, in my humble opinion. There's going to be a Chosen Adventures animated series for kids featuring the original cast in voice acting there, as well as a prequel series about Joseph and one about Moses as well, which will probably tie in directly with The Chosen. They've all but hinted that that's where they will do the transfiguration scene. Just wanted to predict that here. Yeah, you heard it here, not first, but I think most boldly. I think that's when they'll do the transfiguration. And then what was that too? They've already said, okay, guys, guaranteed sequel to the Book of Acts, unless they mess up the crucifixion and resurrection, which they won't. But we're going to get a season 5 next year. That's the Holy Week. And then after that, I think they'll have a break for a prequel. And then they will do seasons 6 and 7 to close out The Chosen proper. Spoiler alert, Christ will die on the cross, and we're all going to be wrecked even more than we should be. And then we'll get to celebrate this reenactment of the resurrection. If we had known this stuff was coming, we would have asked Ryan Swanson about it. But this guy is good. Zach, you remember this interview we had. He didn't say a thing about it. He didn't even give a wink or nod or anything. Total professional there, keeping it very close to the vest.
Yeah, well, neither did I. They asked me to do Moses, and I just said, no, I just can't do that. You guys can, you'll do fine without me. So, I kept that a secret too.
Well, I think they're going to do better than the Ridley Scott version, Gods and Kings, for which I had some high hopes. But it turns out to have been some sort of humanist deconstruction, and somehow God was this bratty little boy. So
but there's
someone
Nephilim
clearly,
or something.
Yeah,
Giants,
that was Noah, and in comparison to Exodus,
right.
Gods and Kings, the Noah one was actually pretty good. You just could think, okay, this is an Elseworld version of the flood, but it's still not the best biblical fiction set to screen. The Chosen really is, and Exodus, Gods and Kings is just going to look like nothing compared to, I'm sure, whatever The Chosen can do with a live action adaptation of the Exodus story. Yeah, Gods and Kings did like God is like this bratty little kid, and they ruined the Red Sea parting. It's just
I just wonder what craft services is going to be like behind the scenes, for all the manna. I wonder what they're actually going to use for that, and it's just going to be like little rice squares or whatever it is. What is manna anyway?
Yeah, what is it? Yeah, the jury's still out there. I think food services is much easier for The Chosen because Jonathan Ralmy is, of course, actually Jesus and worthy of our worship. So he could just generate extra loaves and fish off screen or below the frame. So all kidding aside, hey, Zach, it's getting a little chilly in here. I think we need to put down some ice for the arrival of our guest, Ryan Swanson. Ryan Swanson has just rolled into the studio on his ice skates. In fact, you can't roll onto ice skates. You skate on ice skates. He is one of the writers of The Chosen, and there's a lot more to his biography that we're going to ask about. Ryan, really appreciate you clearing time in your schedule to visit with us.
It's great to be here, Stephen. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I'm kind of amazed that the ice skates made it all the way through Texas. It's about 100 degrees today, so those are quite magical, I would say.
Well, I was here Valentine's Day 20 21.
Oh, that Valentine's
yeah.
Day.
One
Remember,
for the records.
that was that. Yeah, see, ever since we started shooting in Texas, and I've moved here, actually, the something goes on with either we have snow, and a Texan grabs me and says, "This never happens. This never ever happens." We have 45 days in a row of 100-degree temperatures. Somebody grabs me and says, "This never happens."
Yeah.
We have cataclysmic storms one spring, and people say this never happened.
Well, I'm sure it's not the last of the plagues that you all are going to witness, both cultural and meteorological, in the making of The Chosen. And yet, we'll say that the results are fantastic. We've had a few Chosen-related episodes on this podcast, a few articles on the site.
Oh, cool.
This is kind of a... we kind of work our way into this because Lorehaven is about fantastical stories, and yet The Chosen being biblical drama, biblical historical fiction. I would just consider that an honorary cousin genre, even though there are no dragons or spaceships. The only great dragon in the show is the devil, and you don't even see him a whole lot. Or do you? I don't know. I don't know anything. Ryan might know stuff. We'll pick his brain. But first, I want to ask you, Ryan, how did you get into this business? Like discovering, maybe in any particular order, biblical faith and fantastic imagination?
It's going to be a rangy question for me. I mean, I think for every artist, it's your journey and the particular ups and downs of your journey are so formative. They shape the kinds of stories you want to tell, how you tell them. Your mentors along the way are super valuable. For me, I was playing hockey in the United States Hockey League for the Green Bay Gamblers, and I remember being outside of an old spaghetti factory, and I had broken my nose that night for the second time that season, and I was missing half of my two front teeth. I just said, it might not get any better than this. It might never get better than this. I better figure out my life. And I remember that 11-hour bus ride from, that's where we were, outside of Omaha. We were looking at a drive to Thunder Bay, Ontario. And by the time we landed, I was like, the thing I've been doing a lot of is keeping a journal. I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to learn how to write and write well. I ended up going to a school without a hockey team, so I wouldn't be, so it wouldn't pain me that I wasn't playing anymore. They didn't have anything as specific as screenwriting, so I wanted to read as much as I could, and I wanted to answer some questions for myself along the way. So I studied English and religion studies, and the major question I got was, what are you going to do with that? Religion studies and English, my gosh. And I said, I'm going to write scripts. So God had this plan for me way before I did. I was just doing the next right thing at that point, or what looked like the next right thing to me. I read everything. My religion studies program at McAllister was not Christian centered. It was certainly a school founded on Presbyterian precepts, but it was expansive, and it was, and one of my advisors told me straight away, this isn't a faith promoting track, you just know that, but also know that almost all of our faculty have gravitated towards a faith that defines their life. So professors had become Catholics, Quakers, Orthodox Jews. It's quite a mix of, and so I think what it did, and why I'm dwelling on it, is that it's my habit to read a spiritual text and take it as seriously as the people tasked with adapting other texts in Hollywood, where I would soon work. So I watched Peter Jackson and Barry Osborne read Lord of the Rings as if it was word for word what happened on Earth. And And that was super formative for me. How do you treat a story like the gospel in the way it deserves to be treated is exactly what's written on the page for you. That's what we do at The Chosen. Everything on that page is behind an electrified fence. We don't borrow it, co-opt it, shape it, change it for our dramatic purposes. It's what happened. But we also know there was a whole world that wasn't written about happening alongside of it. And that was Dallas's genius killer app. It was the thing that changed everything for me. It made it a high concept project in Hollywood. That means you can explain in a sentence what a movie is about and you get it, right? Like what women want. A womanizer can hear women's thoughts. And you're like, oh, I know that movie. Antics ensue. That's where I started from. And that was what I was open to when I met Dallas.
I mean, I love that concept, and it's so great to hear it framed that way. I mean, because that's what I've always considered The Chosen to be, is we're going to hold the Bible in one hand and take it seriously and not change it. And we're also going to imagine what else happened. It's like the end of John chapter 21, where it says there were also many other things that Jesus did, which if every one of them were written down, I suppose not even the world itself could contain the books that would be written. I've always loved that because I'm like, man, Jesus did so. I mean, we're only getting like part of what happened in 3 years, mostly at the end of that time. Like there were so many other things that we don't even know about. And it's just fun to imagine those. But at the same time, you don't want that imagination to overtake what we know is true. And I think that's why The Chosen immediately grabbed me when I started watching it a few years ago, is because I've seen a number of Christian films, or supposedly Christian films, that change what we know, that change what is written. It's a bad adaptation because it creates a different Jesus. Or on the other hand, something that's just straight literal, and those are fine, but it's just not as fun in some ways, because you're like, well, it's kind of cool to see this. And there's been some great adaptations of Jesus using just the gospel accounts. And that's kind of fun to see how are they going to do this and make it just purely literal. But I love kind of holding both of those things up together. So, I guess the all of the hockey that you learn to do, skating, you're on that like narrow blade. That's kind of what it seems like you guys are doing with The Chosen. You're trying to keep that balance of like, we don't want to just go literal. We don't want to just go imaginative. We want to kind of hold those both in tension.
Yeah. Well, the other thing the three of us have in common, along with an approach, is that while we come from very disparate places, Dallas, Tyler, and myself, we have this thing in common. Now, I'm a recovering alcoholic, depending on how you want to say it, depending on who your sponsor is. I say I'm a recovering alcoholic. And one of the things that I think God laid this in front of me is that I need God every morning to live. I have a chronic disease that wants to kill me and make it look like an accident. And my remission is contingent on the fitness of my spiritual condition. And if you ask Tyler, he will tell you in his own way that he needs God every morning to live. And Dallas will say the same thing. So that's the approach we come with. We have zero interest in telling God who he is. We get to share our love for that book and for God every morning as a part of work. And the three of us sort of keep each other on that narrow blade that you're talking about, because no matter how Hollywood I want to make it, no matter how literal Dallas wants to go, or Tyler, or whomever is pulling in one direction, the three of us have pretty much from day one had this balance among us. It's been a really remarkable and unique, in my experience, partnership.
Now I want to see one of those photoshops of The Chosen cast, or maybe the three of you You, Ryan Swanson, Tyler Thompson, and Dallas Jenkins, all on roller blades. That is not roller blades, roller skates. Obviously, can you tell I've never been skating of any kind, whether ice skating or roller skating?
This was like the 90s, Stephen. I mean, this is all I did. I went everywhere.
I was homeschooled during the 90s. So, of course, as you know, Zach, I missed out on all the cool stuff, even the cool Christian kid stuff. I missed out on some of that, but I'm catching up, and then every once in a while, I find something that's going to be cool, like The Chosen, before it becomes cool. So I want to talk a little bit more about the origin story of that show, even though it's been, talked about a lot. I want to maybe try to find out something we don't know. But first, let's pause for our second sponsor, Blank Spot. So I took it myself for Above the Circle of Earth, the sci-fi that you can pre-buy directly from the new Enclave Publishing store. We're good friends with Enclave, even apart from this new relationship where they're publishing my science fiction adventure launching in March. And just a few weeks ago, Enclave launched its own direct-to-reader store with, get this, permanent 20% off the hardcover copies. If you want digital only, you still have to go through Amazon, and the Amazon is still very good. But if you want 20% off the hardcover for Above the Circle of Earth, you can order now at the Enclave store. We'll have that link in the show notes. By the way, Zach, I just got in the ARCs, the Advanced Reader's Copy for Above the Circle of Earth. You can't see this because it is a podcast, but there it is right there. Sound effects, insert sound effects at the time. Little live Foley there. Speaking of Foley, the inside looks really great, but it's the story that I'm really looking forward to. The fight for the space mission begins in his home world. This is the story of Brock Rivers, who did not want to be a repairman on Mars. But when you evangelize outside of your home preserve in the early 22nd century, sometimes you end up making some foolish choices that'll get you exiled to Mars, where you can have your freedom, but not a whole lot of air. And then Brock and his family has been working to support for 7 years, are summoned back to Earth to restart missions in the 22nd century after generations of neglect. Only this time they're going to face opposition from their own people and, of course, the one world, one solar system humanist space regime called the Cause. Above the Circle of Earth releases in March 2025. It'll be in hardcover, digital, and audiobook. We'll have the purchase links for you in the show notes for this episode 237 or at the lorehaven.com/podcast archive. All right, back to the Ryan Swanson conversation. Chapter 2 now, from filmmaking experience to The Chosen. Of course, we've already gotten into that somewhat. And Ryan, some of your story is known about how you joined up with the Chosen crew. This from the Chosen social media not too long ago kind of explains how you work with the team. It says all three writers on the Chosen, Ryan, Tyler Thompson, and Dallas, contribute equally. But Dallas and Tyler would be the first to tell you Ryan is the keeper of the story. Nothing gets through unless Ryan deems it high enough quality. So no pressure, Ryan. It must pass the smell test. It must be good storytelling and television. If we have something to include from scripture or an important spiritual truth to convey, that's awesome. But Ryan makes sure it works. Not by changing it, of course, but by making sure the show and the plot elevate it. So that's where I think we're dealing with what I would call a super adaptation, not an under adaptation. I mean, you're one of the few people I think with filmmaking experience who's like, no, the book is gold. The book must not be touched. And we're not going to come along and say, hey, we can tell the story better than the original book. That's healthy adaptation. And yet there are details that y'all are adding to and around that to flesh out the story, because the story is not just about Jesus. The story is about the Chosen, his followers. It's right there in the title. That kind of gives you an idea of what the show is actually about. And yet, as a Christian myself and as an enjoyer of stories, I can say that paradoxically, Jesus becomes even more magnified. This illustration of Jesus in The Chosen, which is, I think, a good word for it. This illustration of him points to the real one, even more than maybe a more minimalist movie that's just, hitting the high points of the Gospels, hitting every single mark there, beat by beat, with a more literal minimalist interpretation. So, Ryan, I'm curious, in your own words, then, how you came by seeming chance, but in the providence of God, to join this whole Chosen concept.
As I mentioned, I had struggled with alcohol, and when I got sober and turned my will and my life over to God, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had been in Hollywood at that point for about 10 plus years. I had during that time sold a script to Warner Brothers, done production rewrites. I was mentored by a guy named Akiva Goldsman, who was in the middle of his Oscar campaign for A Beautiful Mind at the time he met me, and he had no reason to take me on whatsoever, and did. He taught me how to write for the screen. My first writing partner and I, a guy named Gideon Raff, I was trying something new, working with somebody. Gideon went on to create Homeland and some other shows. But I had run myself into the ground. I had reached my midpoint, as it were. My best ideas about how to operate my life had got me to the top of one mountain, only to realize there were 26 other peaks in front of me. I was learning to program computers. I was teaching myself how to do that. And my brother had a situation with his daughter. He called me and said, "Your goddaughter is 9 and she still believes in Santa. How do I tell her Santa is a game we play and Jesus is real?" I said, "Well, there's got to be a book about that." Seems like a not universal, but close to it experience, especially in the Western world. And he's like, "Look, there is no book." So I was coming out of this fog, and I was looking for a way to reconnect with people. And so I spent about 6 months interviewing 100 people about their stories, clergy, teachers, psychologists, friends. And I wrote a book, and I turned a couple of chapters into a podcast. My 10th grade Sadie Hawkins date reached out over Facebook and said, "Oh, I like this so much. You gotta meet my husband. I bet we know some of the same people." We were in Hollywood for a long time and moved back to Elgin, Illinois. I said, "Elgin, Illinois, that's where I was born. You're in Elgin right now?" And it seemed like, I was like, yes, I'll go to the North Hollywood Film Festival and watch his movie Two Thieves. So this is Dallas's wife, Amanda. And Dallas and I just hit it off. He seemed to sense that I knew things about writing that were, sorcery. And he had put together a short that was masterfully directed and had this just incredible way of looking at the gospel. I don't know if you know The Two Thieves. You guys know The Two Thieves?
I've not seen that one. I've seen The Resurrection of Gavin Stone. I knew that he had directed some other things before that, some other projects, and I'm somewhat familiar with at least Dallas's story of trying to get into filmmaking, inspired in part by some of the experience with what turned out with the Left Behind direct to VHS videos, and them wanting to do something maybe a little bit different than that. And so along comes The Two Thieves. There's a few other movies, and then of course there was the biblical fiction short that is now chosen canon that led to the entire show ultimately.
Well, The Shepherd was in the same vein as The Two Thieves. It was documenting a totally different event, the Nativity, but this was like Dallas has been doing Chosen in his mind, at least since he was a kid. And The Two Thieves is exactly that. It follows the story of these two guys who are in jail, who stole from the wrong people, got caught. They're looking at a quick trial and a horrible sentence, death by crucifixion. And they are in their cell talking about their lives, talking about how to get out of here, what's going to happen. They get a chance. Nope. They get rustled up and thrown on the cross, and they're next to this guy talking in a way that they've never even imagined the thoughts he's having and expressing out loud. And they over the course of a couple of hours dedicate their lives to his mission. And it's a new way to look at the crucifixion through the eyes of these two guys who were there. Sounds familiar, right?
Yeah, that's really cool. We so within Crew, the Jesus Film media ministry, we made a short film animated called My Last Day, and it uses the audio from the original 1979 Jesus film, but it kind of remixes some other things to show the backstory of the thief that repented, that was on the cross. And so I love that whole idea of like, what did they talk about up there? They were there for 6 hours. How did they get there? Why did one choose Jesus and say, remember me when you come into paradise, but the other one didn't, apparently? Others have even pointed out that it seems that both of the thieves were mocking Jesus at one point.
At least at first.
Yeah, at least at first, until the one repents. And so I've always wondered, like, what was that turning point for him? So what did y'all, I mean, spoil the movie. It's been out 10 years. So.
That's Dallas. And I think Tyler too. That's theirs. I don't know what, I can't remember, just offhand what journey he took them on.
Yeah, we'll have them on the show to ask.
But that was the first time they worked with Jonathan Rumi. That was
of
Jonathan
course, that's right.
Played Jesus in that. So that's how they hooked up. Anyway, I saw this thing and I was just like, that is brilliant. I cut my teeth in feature film development. You're always looking for these little ways into story that let you explore it from a way that starts universal. I think a good high concept starts universal. Situation, a wrinkle in the experience that when you hear it, you're like, oh, that's so simple. Why hasn't that been done before? When you see it, a good film has a bit of inevitability in its ending. If things have been set up right, you're like, that, of course, but it was unexpected nonetheless. And that was this concept. And then I was just, I was just impressed with Dallas as a filmmaker. I didn't know him as a husband, father, Christian, not yet, but that's where it started. And he again, same with me. He didn't know me as a Christ follower, as a man, a worker, anything. We just bonded over script writing, like talking sports with your old man. We get deep later. We just need to start. Or stories or whatever people bond with their family about. Sometimes it's a gateway to more. And for us, it sure was. I think in about 3 months, I was working on his next script for his 2-picture output deal with Blumhouse, which didn't ever come to pass because Gavin Stone didn't perform.
So you were one of the writers on Gavin Stone as well, then?
No, I was. He was already in post on that.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And he was looking to do his second movie of that deal with Blumhouse and Walden, Universal, etc. And it was scrapped as right after opening weekend of Gavin Stone.
Well, for the record, I was there opening weekend of Gavin Stone.
Yeah,
not just because of the Dallas Jenkins name, but because, hey, it was Brett Dalton. At the time, he was big on Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Right, that's why I saw it too.
Spoiler alert! Yeah, he was the Hydra agent all along, you guys. So pretty good at playing the bad boy. But I thought it was a great little story. Like it was a social drama, but it was fun because what really sold me was, okay, here's gonna be a Christian movie that is clearly affectionate toward evangelical churches, toward our culture, at least what I would identify as my culture, but that also has a little fun, even while respecting it. And that's kind of what sold me. I figured we were going to get like sort of a will they, won't they type romantic relationship and probably a conversion by the end. And I was absolutely right. And yet I understand why it didn't do as well. And so I'm sure just as a fan, have mixed feelings because I would have wanted that to happen. And yet, obviously, the director of the biggest motion picture of all, God the author, decided to send things down a different trajectory. If that had won out, then we probably wouldn't have seen The Chosen, but we did. And you started working on that then from the beginning, correct? Part of that 3-person writing team from the start?
Yeah, well, not from the start. While we were working on this feature film, Dallas kept bringing me the script for this nativity movie that he was doing for his church. So I was reading The Shepherd and giving some notes. Again, it was this brilliant lens on the story. It's the same, The Shepherd, it's become canon now, and we've used characters from that short. Young Mother Mary, Raj plays Joseph. We even had one of the shepherds appear in season 3 at Matthew's tax booth. Zach, do you recall that?
That rings a bell. I'll have to think back on
I
it.
remember thinking, I thought that guy looked familiar. Oh, wait. And then my wife had to remind me, that was one of the shepherds.
It's when Matthew's sort of reclaiming his Jewishness, and this guy gives him his tzitzis, and he doesn't get it. Like, he's like, why are these the most valuable thing you own? I can go sell them, but it turns out they're not worth anything monetarily. But the guy was absolutely right, and Matthew's putting him on. But that guy was from The Shepherd. He was a meanie in the Shepherd. I told Dallas something that was important then, and it's become important to the show. And this isn't, the clouds didn't part when I said it. I think it struck Dallas as totally something sensible. But when you do things that affect your nervous system as much as an earnest moment with God in The Chosen, or a horror movie when you are in mortal terror, if you don't give the audience, if you have not given the audience a way to release before that moment, and you just keep building tension and tension and tension and tension, and finally the killer appears, you're going to laugh. And you see it in a live audience. If you go to film all the time, people laugh at the moment that should be scary. Kids laugh at the moment when somebody is spilling their guts out. It's because our nervous systems cannot process this level of tension. In our real lives, we do it because it's actually happening and we can't get through it. Even then, we might have that instinct to sort of laugh at first. But when we're dealing with this, the most important stuff in life, and it comes to a head in a moment when Jesus takes Mary by the hand and uses her given name. If we haven't given you something to laugh at along the way, that's not going to hit the way we need it to. And so I was like, you need a joke in here. Googling Jewish jokes, it yields a lot of disgusting stuff. So, I mean, jokes in our show and jokes in that was a good sort of preview of what writing jokes in our world would be like. They take some creativity to try to place ourselves there and not take a shortcut, not take the easy, ad hominem attack, or, yeah.
I was going to say, one of my favorite examples of that, now that you say that kind of unlocks some understanding for me. It's the scene where there's the demoniac, and that Jesus removes the demons from this man, exorcises the demons. But what happens right before that is he starts to attack everyone, and then Matthew gets out that wooden spoon. And that was the craziest thing of what does Matthew think that spoon is going to do? Well, fast forward a year or two, I went to a podcasting conference in Fort Worth, and The Chosen was there. This was part of, so it was the Spark Christian Podcast Conference, but it was part of the NRB, the National Religious Broadcasters Conference. So The Chosen was there, and there were a bunch of set pieces and costumes and props on display. And one of those props in a glass, encased box was Matthew's spoon. And that was just the funniest thing ever. And I showed it to my kids. We all had such a good laugh about it. But that makes sense now why you did that, because you didn't, all that tension was building up. You knew there was going to be a confrontation between the disciples and this demon-possessed man. And you're right. You don't want people to laugh when the demons come out, because that is a serious moment. And then you played it straight when that actually happened, and that worked so well. So very nice job. Now I see how it works.
Well, now I'm just imagining a fan convention that shows Superman's cape, Thor's hammer, Matthew's spoon. Just those famous props across these multiple different fandoms. Well, what is fascinating here, of course, Ryan, is that The Chosen has now become its own massive fandom. And I like to say that if I had a nickel for every time a Jenkins ended up making a fandom that changed the face of the evangelical culture, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't much, but it's weird that it happened twice. The first time with the Left Behind series, and then the second time with The Chosen. So did you ever wonder, expect, anticipate, dream about being part of such a massive success with this level of fan base, where you're seeing screenshots from the show across the Christ the Redeemer statue in Brazil?
Absolutely not, is the short answer. And the final answer, I can tell you, when we got together in Dallas's basement in Elgin, Illinois, in October of 2017, we knew we were writing about the Bible. And so we knew that at a certain level, we were not in control. We each felt it. We each believed that if you take on this material, you concede all the outcome. You say, I'm not in charge. If I'm doing this, there's moments along the way where you have the choice to take charge all you want. We've seen those adaptations, right? Whether they were done masterfully by Scorsese, but editorially nonetheless, by a man who I consider one of the greatest screenwriters ever to live, Paul Schrader, takes that in a direction that, it means something to him, but and is a movie that stands up, but I don't think it connected with an audience necessarily, or this. Gosh, is there some way I can get out of this without disparaging my heroes? And I'm making it sound like.
Do you want to name The Last Temptation of Christ? I haven't seen it because I'm a Christian.
That's the one. Yeah. Well, and it didn't. It succeeded in ways. Anyway, my point is, we were going to come at this thing faithfully and do everything we could to show on paper, because that's all this was. This was an exercise. So while we're thinking, this is the greatest book ever written, these are the greatest stories ever told, so we know we're starting with strong foundations, but nobody will probably see this because that's just how movie and television filmmaking goes, right? Like you never count on something being a hit. Maybe some people do when they're talking about, throwing $200 million at an adaptation of a best-selling book. My mentor wrote the Da Vinci Code. The Warner Brothers Harry Potter movies were happening at the same time I was with him. These things that have a certain formula and a place in the market already pre-made for them. This wasn't our situation. We were working with producers who without a track record. We were doing this on this absurd crowdfunding financial setup. It was just probably never going to get made. So let's go for it. Let's try this thing. Let's try this formula that Dallas and Tyler had perfected with The Shepherd and with Two Thieves, and tell this story plausibly from people who were present, and we'll take the chance of filling in what happened in their lives from moment A to moment X. The moments that we know happen because they're written about. We'll add some dramatic context. We'll create characters. We'll make these people three-dimensional. We'll have these big moments that the Bible lays out for us clearly, informed by the context of their lives in a new way. And that's really it. It comes down to this simple precept that Robert McKee stated as follows. Drama comes from a characters faced with a binary value choice. They go, fight, flee, love, hate. And it's informed by the pressures of their lives as we've introduced them to you. And that's it. And that was what we did with our characters. So we know Peter, before he was named Peter, stayed up all night fishing and caught nothing. Dude, what's up? Why were you out all night? Why didn't you throw 6 out and just go, I'm calling it? What did he need to be out there all night for? Why did this miracle affect him so powerfully? If he was just having a regular fishing night, why didn't he call it quits? If he didn't call it quits, why did he get in? And this miraculous catch meant the world to him, so much so that he wouldn't be like, I did it. I got a great catch. Thanks, dude. And get out of there. Why was he going? Why did he go, I caught the fish I was trying to catch all night and I'm willing to quit it all? What was the context of that guy's life? And so we came up with this story based on who we knew him to be through his interactions later. We're really reverse engineering who this guy might have been when we met him. We knew he had a brother. We knew he had a wife. You know, it's a lot to give up unilaterally in a moment. So I don't know, you know, and then you start to form sort of networks as you're reverse engineering. We know that Andrew followed John the Baptist. So he would have been predisposed to these ideas. And so with a little nudge from Andrew, maybe that would have made sense for this guy to make this choice. And, you know, I got to say, it was the midpoint. I talk a lot about midpoints. It was the midpoint of our first season. And Tyler and I went to Israel and were shown around by a Messianic rabbi. And that guy argued with us for 4 days that Peter would never have fished on Sabbath. So it wasn't everybody's cup of tea. You know?
Well, by this point, you all had already released, if it was, as you said, summer 2019, you have already released those 4 episodes, which, spoiler alert,
yeah,
the ending of those, it kind of concludes the Peter fishing arc, and then at the end you have the miraculous catch of the midpoint of that first season. So I suppose, I guess, yes, he never would have gone fishing on Shabbat, which just shows to indicate Peter's desperation, because in our show he did.
Well, and that's right, Stephen. We were going for life and death. Like, it had to have meant that much for him out there. And so I think he was passionately proving our point, although he drew a different conclusion from that. So,
well, now we're seeing some repeat scenarios. Oh, sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no. Please. It was an argument that was going nowhere, and so we said, well, we did
that.
We did it based on.
Can you imagine arguments that spiral because of storytellers taking a crack at scripture and filling in some of the gaps in order to focus on our heroes that are not just Jesus? Now, most recently, this happened because you all hit another midpoint. In fact, I think, wait a minute, if we got 7 seasons, was the midpoint halfway? Would have been, the midpoint of season 4. Season 4, yep. Episode 3. Just released a few months ago. And then, blessed people got to see it in theaters a little bit before that. And I'm very grateful they kept their mouth shut, because I'm not going to keep my mouth shut, because at the end of episode 3, Thomas's fiance, his betrothed, ends up killed in a skirmish. And people, including myself, by the way, here I am now telling the writer, but this is to my conviction, not yours. We're like, no, not just because I like that character. They're not allowed to die. Like, I've been around the block. I know likable characters can die sometimes. It certainly happens in reality. And so it's going to happen in a fictional drama as well. But then there I am seeing Jesus decline to heal her. And this has happened before. Jesus was talking with little James in season 3 about why he's declined to heal him of his physical disability. Now we've got the stakes upped a whole lot more. Jesus says it's not her time. And then I realize, hold on a second, this show is respecting Jesus's right to heal or not heal, which is biblical, more than I am. I'm feeling outraged, I think, in, speaking in Christian terms there, in my flesh. Well, Jesus is supposed to heal anybody. He's God. He can do it. But just because he is God and can do it doesn't mean he always will. He will raise her up on the last day, one way or another. But whether or not he brings someone back to life, that is his prerogative. And yet I think it's healthy for people to debate this and argue about this and even feel some grief which seems to have been one of the purposes of y'all putting that in there. It's a fascinating exercise in what is and isn't biblical and what isn't a great story.
Well, thanks for saying so. We and for giving us that. And what we offer back is that if whether you think that moment, whether that moment resonated, didn't, whether you think we were wrong to do it, or right, whether it caused you to reflect or not, you're right. And that's your prerogative as viewers. This needs some explanation, but we have limited means. I know just how limited they are because for 7 years I've had my nose in a Bible reading about Jesus and his teaching. He was, I in all the superlative names he's rightfully been given, I rarely hear greatest teacher ever as something people ascribe to him in prayer. He knew how to touch people's hearts in a language they could understand without exclusion, without exception. He knew, Zach, Stephen, how to reach you guys and what you needed to hear for this message to not just resonate intellectually, but for you to feel it and for it to change your life. He knew how to call exactly the people he called. He knew how his actions in Holy Week would affect the socio-political infrastructure of Jerusalem during Passover. That's something we explore in the coming season, is how surgical his strikes were, knowing exactly what was at stake for the power players of the time. And in a way, the teachings never stopped, right? Like that we're now given this mantle, each of us who read and give our lives to the book that documents his mission. We are so limited as screenwriters, not only because we can't affect the 150 people who show up to work on the film every day during production and the ideas that they came with that day, and not only because it gets translated through the brilliance of our actors and wrangled like cats by Dallas ably, but it goes on to post-production, the camera. There's so little we can actually control, and we are not ever going to have the authority or impact of the Bible. What we were trying to do, I can only speak for me, Dallas and Tyler aren't here, but I know that we share a mission. We have to translate our experience with Jesus Christ through the one life we're given here on earth. And that life is punctuated by a whole lot of sadness, injustice, darkness. Grief does not have the place it deserves in communal life anymore. Once upon a time, we used to grieve in our tribes. We used to grieve communally. It is a solitary, sullen, holistically devastating experience that we go through so often just with ourselves. Why does God put that there? And why, even leading up to writing that, did my brother Tyler experience not one, but 2 losses?
Oh, wow.
In just the weeks leading up to writing this scene. Why were these people who'd given their lives for 80 plus years to God, why weren't they saved? Why couldn't they live to see season 4? We heard from a lot of people who were affected by this, and the thing I have to reiterate every chance I get is we didn't do this. There was nothing glib about this for us. We love Yasmin. Yasmin Al-Bustami has become every single person I've ever met's favorite person on set.
Mm-hmm.
We loved writing Rama. We loved seeing Thomas happy. And it was agonizing to think, we're going to do this in our show. It's going to come off like a stunt. It's going to come off like a water cooler moment that we planned and laid in there as an emotional act of terrorism. We were exploring what most of our lives is like, which is full of loss.
Yeah.
And we were trying to say, I can't speak for Tyler and Dallas, they're not here, but in my contribution to that scene and that setup, I was trying to explore, how can you live through these moments and know that God is real also?
Yeah.
That's it. What we left you with, if you disagree and it sends you back to the Bible, my gosh, that's more than I ever thought I would achieve as a screenwriter, is writing anything that sent people back to their Bibles.
It definitely resonates with me. And by the way, so true confession, I hadn't watched that far into season 3 or season 4. So I'm finding this out in real time about what happens, but I could kind of see the writing on the wall.
Zach, sorry about that, brother.
I mean, watching up to I guess I'd watched 1 or 2 episodes of season 4, so I hadn't watched 3. But I could kind of see this coming because you've got this really happy Thomas. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is going to be doubting Thomas. So how does he go from happy Thomas, engaged, to doubting Thomas? Something's going to change in his life. And something had to have changed, right, to make him that kind of cynical. Just as we know something's going to happen with Judas, that he's this, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed guy. It's like, something's going to change in that guy's life. So I understand it from a story logic standpoint, but I also understand the choice from, as you said, the real life grief that we face, because we've all had unanswered prayers for someone's healing, for someone's, restoration, perhaps for a prodigal, type relative or sibling or parent or whatever. And we've all had those moments where, like, did God hear that prayer? Surely he heard it. So why didn't he act? And we've all had those doubts. And I think that's actually the more uncomfortable thing that we face when we see a moment like this, where people wanted Jesus to heal and he said no.
Yeah.
Because it's a little bit easier to answer with the story of Lazarus. Jesus ultimately resurrected Lazarus. He didn't need to heal him of his disease because he brought him back to life. And it's like, oh, okay, I can kind of understand that now. It's a lot harder to see in other situations. But you also just think, people were living and dying all the time during Jesus' life. He didn't bring everyone back to life. Now,
no.
But again, the question is, would he have not brought someone back to life when he was asked to? And I think that's a brilliant question that you're posing to the audience, because really we're having to look at our own lives. And, for me, this is very personal, because my sister passed away about a year ago from cancer. And, after we thought she had beat breast cancer, it turned into brain cancer. After we thought she was going to beat that, it got much worse. But it was because of that experience that she came to know the Lord 6 months before she passed. And I mean, it's a crazy thought, but I'm like, did God, is that why everything happened? I mean, I can't see any other way around it. Because it was the very last day of her radiation treatment that she's like, I can feel everyone's prayers for me. I'm never going to doubt God again. I know that he's real and I know that he loves me. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, did it really take all of this, for that to happen? And then the next 6 months, like, hospice, everything goes downhill, but I never saw her get angry. And she had a peace about her I'd never seen in her before. And I'm just like, this had to be how God knew that this would need to happen. As you said, it's that kind of surgical strike of just at being the best teacher. Like, he knew how to teach her. He knew how to show her something that she wasn't going to understand otherwise.
Yes.
And like, I mean, I'm still like making sense of it myself, because I'm like, okay, well, God, I mean, I'm glad that she gave her life to Christ, but I really wish she had lived through this. Like, I'm still, I mean, personally angry. Like, wait a minute. Like, I had prayed for my sister for 27 years to come to know the Lord, and she does, and then she slips away. Like, that's not fair. Like, I'm still dealing with that, right? I don't know. I mean, these are the toughest questions of life, and I think that when we don't want to deal with those, we instead just get mad at a TV show.
Well, it's kind of a way to vent, though, to kind of give expression to those feelings. Like, Ryan, I think you mentioned earlier, the story has to be about these universal experiences. And while not all of us can share the claim, oh, well, once upon a time I was living in first century Israel, and Jesus recruited me to join his revolutionary gospel movement, the original one. Like, no, we weren't there, but we have been there questioning him because he didn't heal a family member. And we've got to think about those things. And it's one issue. Like, well, for example, some critics expect things of The Chosen or of storytelling that it is not supposed to do. Like, well, hey, wait a minute. This show didn't act like the sermon I had in my head, so therefore it's a bad show. This is absurd. The show is an illustration. It's a story. It is artwork. It is theatrical. It's meant to explore these questions at the human level, even while still illustrating the person and mission of Jesus Christ. So no, it's not going to be like a sermon. And you need a sermon every once in a while. You need to flip to your Bible and go to Romans 8:28. All things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. But sometimes it helps not just to drop that verse on someone's head, but to illustrate it and to get those discussions going and to get people asking those things, not just about themselves, but about the characters. I may be wondering, well, how do I feel about Rama's death? The question I should be wondering is, what is Thomas going to do? How am I going to lose myself and enter into his world, as you all have illustrated it? We may know the ending from the Gospels, the whole doubting debacle, but what makes sense about him going there? So we don't just flatten him into a cartoon character, doubting Thomas, TM, who needs to learn his lesson and not doubt anymore. It's a lot more complicated than that in the scripture, and The Chosen is going to help bring that out.
I appreciate not only it's the basis for this podcast, but it sounds like, an approach to life to give us that freedom of expression and to explore our faith in this way, in this very public way. The Romans verse, it's not just Thomas either. Her death brings forth and makes possible three biblical moments, the two of which you've already seen. You've seen this seed of doubt planted for Thomas, and that's the most obvious one. But it also put Gaius in a position where he could ask for healing for his servant boy, his child, his son. But in our world, he's an illegitimate child that he fathered with servant. That Gaius needed to be freed of the yoke of his previous position, where he couldn't just freely approach Jesus. He couldn't just freely, accept these two Jesus followers into his office to discuss what was going on at home. And the Bible describes that moment very literally. If we were going to have this happen to Gaius, he had to be the leader in town. He had to also, you remember from the biblical passage, there's the followers say to Jesus, "This is a good man. He helped rebuild our temple."
Yeah.
So that's why we had him working on the cistern with Peter. And so, there's these little things we've tried to lay in, and there's a third big biblical moment that comes from Rama that we haven't seen yet. And I'm not alluding to Thomas having to put his fingers in Jesus' wound is something else totally. All these moments are possible through this action in our plot. Now, again, we don't have the impact or the authority to even evoke Romans necessarily, but what we do want to do here is to show that it's possible that through Jesus' ways are not ours. And he is, as you referred to him, the ultimate author. And so sometimes maybe it's possible, maybe it gives me some solace to realize that these things that hurt me so much here on earth are really a part of a bigger plan that I can't see, can't conceive, and, aren't happening on my timeline.
Fantastic. Let's break real quick for our third sponsor, author Vince Mancuso, who has to have, he didn't pay me to say this, but he has to have like one of the coolest author names that you can imagine there. Vince Mancuso, and his series is the Jabin Kanos series. What if the heroes of old walked among us today? In the story of Jabin Kanos, one young man discovers he has extraordinary abilities locked away in his DNA, and he isn't alone. Set in an America rebuilding from its second civil war, the Jabin Kanos trilogy blends superhero action with dark conspiracies. As Jabin and his team grow in their abilities, they also learn that the legends of yesterday had monsters to match their heroes. With each book, the stakes grow higher. Loyalty is tested, sacrifices are made, and Jabin must discover which defines a hero more, their past or their future. Experience the Jabin Kanos trilogy, where tomorrow's technology meets yesterday's legends. It's perfect for the whole family and is available now on Amazon.com. Cover and links in the show notes for this episode 237. Now, back to finish off the interview. And now let's go to chapter 3, because we've had Ryan on and saved this conversation for this date, because if I've timed it right, this Friday, you'll have another theatrical presentation coming out that's not a chosen marathon in theaters. We get season 5, Lord willing, next year, just having concluded season 4 this past year. But now, Ryan, you've gone from The Chosen to this remake of the best Christmas pageant ever. And now I have to make a confession. I have never seen anything but clips and memes and allusions to the original 1971 holiday story and the original movie. So when I go see this, I know everybody says that. I'll be going in completely blind. This will be the first one I see. Like I said, sometimes I didn't even see the stuff the cool Christian kids were seeing. And this apparently was a cool Christian thing. Yeah. This story about a family entrusted with the holiday pageant at their church that then has to end up recruiting the bad kids for this. So in what little time we have left, Ryan, I'm curious, like, how you got onto this project and what you're looking forward to about the release, which I think in U.S. theaters is Friday, November 6th.
You laid it out. The Best Christmas Pageant Ever is a book that's been, I think, in print for more than 50 years. The Barbara Robinson, her best known from her series of the Best Ever thing, Best Ever blank. She had a series of best other holidays and best first grade ever. Dallas is a huge fan of this book. Dallas and his wife Amanda read it every year, and I think Dallas probably mentioned this to me 2 months into knowing him, that this would be his dream project. And so when through some outrageous good fortune, it was presented to him by Lionsgate that he might be able to get the rights to it, he went headlong. And he did it after prayer and after consulting Amanda, who, as I understand it, told him, you can't do anything but The Chosen until The Chosen is done. Except for the best Christmas pageant ever, if that should ever happen.
Plot
and
twist.
So he went headlong into it, man, and got the rights to it. Again, it's just because it's on my resume and it's where I came from. Feature film development and writing feature scripts is, where I was most comfortable 7 years ago. He came and said, "Will you throw down the first pass of this?" And it wasn't the first pass. A couple of other authors and also the rights holders to the book, Darren and Platt, had written a script, and we were aiming to just go as much from the book as possible. The book is actually a wonderfully 3-act cinematic vision of this event, and I took a crack at it. I had 5 weeks between writing outlines of season 4 episodes, so I jammed and got 3 outlines done, and then took 6 weeks to go write this, or 5 weeks, whatever it was, and actually checked myself into. I was 11 days into a 5-week assignment, and I hadn't written a word. And so I checked myself into a hotel in a city that I don't know, Portland, Oregon. And I wasn't going to leave that room until I was done, except for lunch, coffee, and dinner. And so I did. And, the story is, Dallas has shaped it in so many wonderful ways, just, not only with what the book brings up for him, his how he's seen it crystallized in his head for years and years, and that's how Dallas experiences the world, man. When he was going to church as a kid, he was sitting there imagining these scenes in 3D, imagining the characters present for them. I mean, it's his love language, So he had, I'm sure, went down the road and with so many of these scenes, already played them out in his head. And it's just a wonderful payoff to, what I think Christian film can be, which is to say, let's drop into a world where Christianity, Jesus Christ, belief is just a factor of life. Just like we drop into any other movie we watch, we drop in and learn quickly. We acclimate to the rules of this world. That's all we're trying to do. Not every story is literally about the gospel. But the gospel informs how all of our characters see the world and the choices they make. So when we're faced with that Robert McKee drama, characters faced with a binary value choice based on the context of the life as we've introduced it. We've introduced a life where faith is a condition and a consideration for our characters. That's the evolution. It's nothing. It shouldn't be anything more than that, because for you guys, you don't see a burning bush every day on your way to work, but there was once. So you're open to the ways that God is communicating with you. So that's all. We're just changing the conditions of our character's life. And this is one of these wonderful ways where we can take a totally human story and say, what if it happened to these characters who know God existed and exists in their lives today, and that faith is a consideration, and let's fade in on that world. And it intersects with the church, it intersects with the nativity story, it intersects with sociological conditions that made possible a group of kids from the wrong side of the tracks. It also introduces something that will be very familiar to churchgoers, especially lifelong ones, that sometimes rituals get stale. Sometimes they lose meaning because they've just become mechanical and rote. And it introduces, I think for everybody, including our audience today, a new way to see these events and to celebrate them with their family and prioritize them.
Yeah, I love this story. My kids are in a Christian youth theater, and their company just did the best Christmas pageant ever last year as a musical, and that was so fun. I still have as we're talking about this, all the songs are going through my head. I think this is just like more a straight movie than a musical, And I love what you said about the gospel informs the story. Everything happens in a way that surprises you. And that's what makes it fresh. And that's what makes it so powerful. Just recently I watched this, 30-second video clip that was going around social media of a prisoner baptizing another prisoner who he had led to Christ. And all they had for baptism was a trash can. They put like I'm sure a fresh bag in there, put water in there, and the guy's standing in it, and he just like kind of like makes him squat down in it. And I guess they didn't factor in, the Archimedes principle or whatever, so the water just goes everywhere. But it was so amazing. Like, it was so cool to see that. Like, that's not something you see every day. But this story is so great because but the best Christmas pageant ever is so great because it shows you no one's out of reach of God's grace, and like, don't give up on anyone. And that's very much the story with my sister. Like, don't ever give up praying. Like, as long as someone's alive, just keep praying. And sometimes you may have to pass the baton, in terms of sharing the gospel. There was a point with Nicole where I'm like, I think I'm just being counterproductive here. And I just kind of let Naomi take over, or my kids, and even just sometimes in prayer, honestly, sometimes you do get weary. You have to have those people that keep encouraging you to keep praying for that person or those people, to not give up, because, God, that's why we are here in Christ's family. Someone else didn't give up praying for us, but more importantly, like, Jesus chased us down. So that's, I love this story. I can't wait to see this in theaters.
Yeah, Zach, Stephen, this is also, to me anyway, when I look back at the tapestry of my own life, right? We're usually so close to the threads. We're just experiencing, red, blue, violet, indigo. We can't see the pattern anything is making, except occasionally we get a chance to sort of take an overview. God was working in my life from the moment I gave myself to him. And none of these things, the downtimes, the things I said yes to, things I said no to, would have made sense if I had been given all the context. So I just feel like God is working whether we are or not. And it's this wonderful thing for this story to lead these kids to this place, because they wanted candy, because they wanted free stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that's how God met these kids. And then, and they were brought into a fold that it's the magic of the story. It's the magic of his story. And the way it plays out is totally how I've experienced God. You know what? Like, you just try to misuse your gifts. Go ahead. Try to drive your own story and your own self by self-will alone. And sometimes it's right where he wants you. Run yourself into the ground. Have your own midpoint. Hit a wall. These kids were brought in with the kindest of kid gloves, if you're looking at it from a God's authorial position. Fine. You want to beat this kid up and take his money? He's going to, you do it for a week, he'll fight back and say, go ahead, take my stuff. I get everything I want from church anyway. And they're like, huh? That was a real low point for Charlie. But Charlie was our evangelical there without knowing it. He was just using his own defects, his own cockiness, fight back. The one thing I got is to lie about church and all the candy I get there. It's great to me. To me, it's such a wonderful story about how God really works in our lives, and we can share that with the nativity through this particular avenue of experience. It all comes back to the nativity, and
it really does.
The center of our Christian Christmas.
Exactly. Well, that's how The Chosen started, with that shepherd. So we've been all over the calendar with the holidays. We've got Christmas before return to that for a few Christmas specials for The Chosen. And then starting next year, yes, already The Chosen is moving into Holy Week, is moving into that, what's traditionally been called the Passion narrative. And I love it, by the way, that now 3/4, or no, actually, it's more like 3/7 of the entire show is going to be focused on this pivotal moment in Christ's life. It's not just a few days at the very end, as if the crucifixion and resurrection are an afterthought. It's the whole reason, like you said, Ryan, his surgical precision, even while being fully human, still being God and having that access to the foreknowledge, almost like he's read the script, but is no less human for this purpose, to die, to save his own, to bring about the kingdom and the resurrection. And then also you see this application then in the best Christmas pageant ever. What does this look like in our modern culture? And yes, I'm going to be brand new to that story. I have no idea who Charlie is. I'm looking forward to knowing in about a week or so. That movie, by the way, does release on Friday, November 8th in the United States. Friday, November 8th is the release date for best Christmas pageant ever. Great way to kick off that holiday season as we move back into it. And Ryan, thank you so much for stopping by and spending so much time. Looking forward to people's thoughts about this episode, as well as ongoing thoughts about The Chosen. Season 5 releases next year, and you can learn more about that, of course, at thechosen.tv. It's the free app. It's still free to watch, but you need to support this show. Buy some disc copies, get some sweatshirts, all that good stuff. And then I'll also put the link in there, Ryan, for your page at IMDb. Anything else to add before we send you back out on your ice skates?
Oh, man, it's been really fun talking to you. I've heard a lot about what you do through Jeneth, and I think what you're doing is exactly in line with how I see entertainment for the kingdom, is that we try to be storytellers first. And in our personal lives, we try to align ourselves with God. And, if the two don't have to be such a literal effort, like you don't have to go out and try to redo the Gospels or portray the Gospels like we're doing with The Chosen. It can be in a story about a sports movie about a guy who wants to be the best drummer he can be and has a mean teacher. It can be in any story that you want to tell. I think we just have to focus on telling these stories the best way we can. And it's just a slight adjustment of our, axis to remember that it is a condition for people to consider faith and for faith to be real. I think that sets us on a different track already.
Fantastic. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for thinking this out and for making these stories, not just talking about them, but actually making them. We'll look forward to seeing more of that. So Godspeed to you and yours.
Yeah, you guys are great. Thank you.
Well, that was a lot of fun talking to Ryan. And to you, our listener, I'd like for you to imagine for a second a fight between the Sons of Thunder in The Chosen and the Herdmans from the best Christmas pageant ever. Who would win in this epic matchup? Send us your opinion and your prediction to podcast@lorehaven.com or any other comments you have on this episode. And now we'd like to go to a couple comments we've gotten before. Our first comment here is from @ChloeGotLB40, who commented on the YouTube page for episode 219. How did Gap Digital turn Left Behind into cinematic audio drama? That was our interview with audio engineer Todd Bastide. And Chloe got to meet him in a sort of a unrelated way. But she said, quote, I had the privilege to record the song Remember Me from Mark Schultz years ago at Gap Digital during the time they were recording the Left Behind audio dramas. I'm grateful that Todd didn't inform me who he played in the series until after I finished the song. Imagine my shock to know that Mac recorded my song. At that time, I only knew him as the guy who ran Gap Digital and did these audio dramas. I had asked him to sign a magazine for me. He asked me if I wanted it signed by Todd Bastide or Spencer Benford. It took me about 30 seconds to realize he was the voice of Mac. This series is what my name here is based on. Chloe Got Left Behind. Unquote.
It's great to hear from her. I'm always glad to meet a fellow Left Behind Stan, even 20 some odd years after the series concluded with the return of Jesus Christ in 2004. You'll notice, listener, if you heard that episode, we didn't even talk about Todd being the voice of Mac, who ended up being kind of a walk-on character in book 3 and audio drama 3. But then in the very next book and drama, number 4, Soul Harvest, Mac is a full-time member of the cast. And actually, spoiler alert, he doesn't get killed off on the way to the glorious return of Jesus either. He is there for the whole time. So I wonder if Todd would have taken that role if he had known that Mac was going to last so long and not gotten beheaded by the global community or something by book 8.
Well, we also got a note here from Jason Bergstrom, who I've known actually a really long time. And this was from episode 235. What are the scariest stories about aliens among us? And Jason says, quote, I hadn't really equated the types of alien stories with how they represent some of our basic fears. The kind that might freak me out the most is the fear of invading your personal space and feeling helpless in the face of such a creature. Alien and Aliens are two of my all-time favorite movies, despite the first one qualifying as more frightful. The xenomorph with its beastly design and never-ending goal to get you like a space zombie is one thing, but then how they're born from your own body in a way that's out of your control is very scary. It's the fear of invading your personal space on 2 levels. Then Jason also says, did anyone else read the My Teacher is an Alien books? I loved those as a kid. I reread them with my son a couple years ago, and the first 3 are good. Then the 4th goes super environmentalist. Pretty disappointed. Rob Zach for mentioning Sphere. That was my favorite Michael Crichton book. And yes, way better than the movie, unquote. Okay, so I really got to put Sphere at the top of my list because I mean, that's always the gimmick, right? The book was better than the movie, but I've heard many, many people say the book was great. And, My Teacher is an Alien. I haven't heard of those. Honestly, my first association there was a movie called Faculty, which is about these high school kids evading their alien-possessed teachers. But instead of environmentalism in that movie, it was somehow they used drugs to get rid of the body snatcher aliens. And that's also not a great message. So if you've got any more comments on this or our episode with Ryan Swanson, send us a note to podcast@lorehaven.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.
Next on Fantastical Truth, boom, doom, and gloom. Criminals pillage, cities burn, mobs rampage, tyrants rule with iron fists. We live in a society, and people here often feel that we're overdue for dystopia. Even now, dystopian tales prove popular among many readers. Next week, let's explore why this is and ask whether Christian fans really need these kinds of dystopian stories. I do believe we need these kinds of stories, whether they are occasional dystopian stories or fantastical fiction especially, or biblical fiction. Yes, absolutely. There can be some challenges with these stories. You may need to train to enjoy them if you do, but know that it's not just a story. It's never just a story. People work hard on these things, like Ryan Swanson and all the team there with The Chosen and the Bible verse and the adjunct edition, I suppose, there of the best Christmas pageant ever, also part of the Bible verse. Pray that we can enjoy these stories for God's glory and be thankful for them as we continue to seek and find Christ, our giver's fantastical truth.